Hi class 10. So even during your exam times, you'll be receiving some videos, not every day, but on alternative days. So you have 3 days of homework for geography. So you will be receiving maybe among those 3 days, 1 day or 2 days, uh, your regular homework, and the other day you'll be receiving just a homework which will be through which I'll be telling you to revise for the test which is coming up. So there's a reduction, but not a significant reduction because there's still some portions which are left to complete, and you know the speed at which geography is going is pretty slow. So anyway, we'll be moving on into the next chapter. So these will be the last two chapters which will be completed before your first term exam, which is conventional and non-conventional source of energy. So we'll start off with conventional source of energy. And these are the normal conventional or usual methods we use to produce energy. There are many methods: coal, petrol and natural gas. Since natural gas has been removed from the syllabus, only coal and petrol are left out for us to study. Today's topics, just like I told, is conventional source of energy, coal and petroleum. Three major aspects of this is we have to learn: distribution, advantages and disadvantages. But there will be a little more extra which we'll be learning to get a better understanding of these three factors of distribution, advantages and disadvantages. Iron ore, manganese, copper, bauxite uses and the distribution has already been completed. And you also know that what are also been completed over here, manufacturing industries and transport are also been completed. So these are the two other factors, two other chapters, sorry, three chapters that has been completed previously. So all these are also included along with what I'm teaching now, which will be coming for your first term exams. So we'll start. To start off with, when you look at this picture, you can clearly understand that it's a substance which is burning, but it is not giving out much smoke. It is leaving very less residue or ash, and yet it's continuing to burn. So these are the major qualities required for something to be called a potential source of producing energy, or a potential component that can produce energy. You see, you can take a paper, you can burn it, and that also will produce heat energy. But for how long? And for example, if you take an A4 sheet paper, it can just burn out within 10 seconds or 15 seconds maximum. So you just want to produce energy for 15 seconds. You can't call that energy. It is not, you cannot use it for any good purpose. But you take a piece of coal and you burn it. It will continue to burn. A small piece of coal can continue to burn for at least minimum 35 to 40 minutes, which is comparatively a large amount of energy, heat energy, which is consistently giving. So that is the biggest logic that you have to understand. Why did people choose something as coal so that they can produce energy out of it? Because it gives energy for a long period of time, because it leaves less smoke compared to other components, and because it has very less residue. So and among these points also, the most important point is it burns for a long period of time. So something which can burn for a long period of time is very, very important to be considered as a potential energy source. So conventionally, we use coal and petrol as a potential energy source to produce energy, and that energy will change it into mechanical and all kinds of other forms of energy where we can use it in industries, we can use it in automobiles, we can use it in factories, we can use it to produce something, we can use it to change, transform. Lot of factors we use it for, but we need so much energy and we can get it from something which is producing for a long period of time. So this is how coal is formed. You can see that millions of years ago dead plant matter fell into swampy water. Over time a thick layer of dead plants lay decaying at the bottom of the swamps. Over time the surface and climate of the earth changed and more water and dirt were washed in, halting the decay process, forming peat. So you look at the first picture, 100 to 400 million years ago, there's plant thriving in the land and there's water body also. So maybe some natural disaster happened or the plants died and it fell into the water. So it starts to decay. But something happened that has stopped the decay. If it decays, what happens? It will ultimately convert back into soil. But it didn't convert back into soil. It continued to stop decaying because so much of sand and dirt and water was washed in and covered this plant matter which was submerged, and that did not allow the vegetation or plant to decay. So when it doesn't allow the plant to decay, what happens is that it starts changing into something else. It becomes preserved and it transforms into something else. And in the second paragraph, you can see that the weight of the top layer, so just one layer of sand, another layer of soil, another layer of mud, another layer of water, then there's some layers of rock. It keeps on adding and adding and adding, and it doesn't allow the vegetation underneath to decay, and it compresses and adds weight, add more pressure, add more force. The same thing like how it happens to a metamorphic rock. An earlier igneous or sedimentary rock, when it transforms because of more pressure and temperature and time, it changes into something new. Same thing is happening here. Under heat and pressure, this plant matter underwent chemical and physical changes. So the chemical composition also changes. Physically also it looks totally different. What is chemically changing? It has a lot of oxygen. You know that plants have a lot of oxygen, and oxygen is fundamentally required for the decaying process. So because decaying is not happening, it pushes out all the oxygen and takes in and stores all the hydrogen and carbon. So that is why coal is called a hydrocarbon deposit. So it leaves out all the oxygen, takes in only the hydrogen and carbon and stores it. Once all the hydrocarbons are stored, the plants are gradually turned into coal. Coal can be found underground as shown in the graphic, or it can be found near the surface. So you can clearly see the picture. So when you have a band or a layer of coal, it's usually called a coal seam. So in the left picture is the first 100 to 400 million years ago how the plants are. Then it is immersed and it is covered by different layers. It turns into peat, which is the initial or first layer, or first type or the lowest quality of coal. Then after many years it forms a strong band of coal seam. So the people have to mine underground and take it out. Here you have four types. The highest grade being anthracite, the second quality is bituminous, the third quality is lignite, the fourth quality is not subbituminous, but the fourth quality is peat. I put subbituminous because it is a sub variety or subcategory of bituminous coal itself. So I wanted you to know it, and that's why subbituminous. Everything has different energy level production capabilities. It has different carbon content. It is formed by different time periods. So all these factors are different. The first one I told the lowest quality is peat. So you can look at this. It is the first stage of transformation. It contains less than 40. So you don't have to write 40 to 55, you can write less than 40 percentage. And you have to understand there are four main aspects of coal. One is impurities. If there is more impurities, the coal will be low quality or bad. If there's more moisture, the coal will be low quality or bad, because you can imagine dipping a matchstick in water and trying to strike it, the chances of it burning is less. Taking a green leaf, trying to burn it, the chances of it burning is less. But you take a dry leaf and try to burn it, it will burn very easily because it doesn't have moisture, it is totally dry. So if there is more moisture, if there is more impurities, the quality of the coal will be bad, it will not burn well, and it will give out more smoke and more pollution. At the same time, if it has more carbon content and if it is formed by more time, or if it is formed with a longer period of time, it means it is a good quality coal. Okay, this contains sufficient volatile matter and lot of moisture. It is left to itself, burns like wood, gives very less heat, emits more smoke and leaves a lot of ash. Number two, lignite. It's also called brown coal. It's kind of like chocolate brown in color. It is also a lower grade coal. Among the layers of qualities, it is considered as a third quality coal. From the top quality, this will be the third. 40 to 55 percentage of carbon. Intermediate stage, dark to black, brown. Moisture content is also high, 35%, which means it doesn't burn very well. It undergoes spontaneous combustion, which means it cracks and it doesn't take time to burn. Usually coal takes time to burn. For it to get the fire, it takes time, but it burns spontaneously. So because it burns spontaneously, it is actually having a negative impact. It can cause fire accidents and blasting in mines. Number three, so number three and four is actually what is supposed to be called coal, good quality coal. This is called bituminous coal, which you can have 60 to 80 percentage of carbon. It's written 40 to 80, but you can change it to 60 to 80 percentage of carbon. So it is soft Soft doesn't mean that it is very soft like rubber or cake. It is soft compared to anthracite, which is the highest quality, is a little more softer, which means it's easily breakable. It is easily breakable. That is what they mean by soft. Most widely used coal and derives its name from liquid called bitumen. So there's a liquid, it's called bitumen, it's also a hydrocarbon deposit, and that is how it gets its name bituminous coal. Moisture and volatile content is much more lesser, which is 15 to 40%. Dense, compact, and usually black in color, does not have traces of original vegetable matter. So if you look at the first two, you can see that somewhere or the other, you can see, okay, this is formed from plant because it's brown in color, or because it has some roots, or because it has the representation of something related to plants. But bituminous and anthracite, you will never find out anything related to a plant matter in the coal at all. It has totally transformed. It has high calorific value. Calorific value is the value of energy produced. So when you burn it, if it produces more energy like anthracite and bituminous, it has high calorific value. If it produces less energy like peat and lignite, it has less calorific value, used in production of coke and gas. Moving to the fourth one, anthracite coal. So this is obviously considered as a metamorphic rock because you can see how much a plant has transformed, and look at this, it totally looks like a glossy shiny rock under high pressure, high temperature for a long period of time. It doesn't look like a plant at all. It is considered the best quality coal, and it is hard and very rigid. 80 to 95% of carbon content. It can burn really well, very less volatile matter, and very less moisture, so it doesn't cause smoke or ash. Semi metallic in luster, it almost reflects like light like a metal. So luster is the ability of a mineral or a rock to reflect light, and when it is reflecting it in a metallic way, it is called metallic luster. Ignite slowly, gets so there's less loss of heat and high efficiency. Ignite slowly and burns with a nice short blue flame. So if you burn the highest quality anthracite coal, you will get blue flame. So complete combustion flame is blue, little or no pollutants, example LPG. So when you burn LPG gas in your homes, the flame is blue. It's mainly because there is no impurities. When there is impurities, for example you burn paper, the flame is orange because there is impurity. Sometimes even when you burn your gas stove, you can see that there's some orange sparkles that come in between those blue flames. If you notice very carefully, not all the time but sometimes, that means that your LPG gas cylinder has gas which has small amount of impurities. When there's no impurities, it is totally blue. And anthracite also burns with blue flame. In India, it is found only in Jammu and Kashmir, and that too in a small quantity. Based on origin, based on when it was formed, the age at which it was formed, we can divide it into two parts. The black areas marked is one part, and the red areas marked is another part. So the black portions marked is Gondwana field, and the red is tertiary coalfields. So this is according to the age. So Gondwana coalfields are formed 200 million years ago, so they are very old, and they form 90 percentage, which means a very big majority of India's coal. The other one, tertiary, is just formed 59 to 60 or 65 million years ago, which is compared to Gondwana, it is young, much younger, and it comprises of just 10 percentage of India's coal. Gondwana coal fields, because it comprises 90 percentage, it has 80 coal fields. So if you put a line, a circle around the Gondwana coalfield regions, you will get a total of 80 coalfields, individual coalfields within the Gondwana system. But within the tertiary system, there's around 33 coalfields, and it is separated into two halves. One you can see in the northeast of Assam and Meghalaya, and the other one you can see in Gujarat and Rajasthan. It is not a single cluster, it is separated into two halves. Okay, so the regions of Gondwana coalfields are mostly the river basins. You can see in West Bengal you have Damodar, and in UP or Jharkhand you have Son, and your Mahanadi, Godavari, all these river valleys and river systems where there is sedimentation taking place. Those are the regions which fall in the states of Jharkhand, West Bengal, Madhya Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh, where these Gondwana coalfields are formed. While the tertiary coalfields are formed in Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, Meghalaya, Nagaland, and also on the western side like Gujarat and Rajasthan. So if you look at according to the quality of coal, not according to the age, according to the age of coal, you can see Gondwana coalfields more towards the eastern side, and the other tertiary coalfields, the younger ones, which are more towards the western side of Gujarat, Rajasthan, and also some northeast states. That's how it was separated. But if you look according to the quality, anthracite, we learned it is only in Jammu and Kashmir. Bituminous, or the second quality, it is of Gondwana coalfields, mostly in Jharkhand, Odisha, West Bengal, Madhya Pradesh. Lignite and peat are the next two qualities. Lignite, you can see the region which is shaded with a light gray color in this map. There's light gray and dark gray. The light gray is lignite, you can see in the legend. So lignite there's in Tamil Nadu, there's Rajasthan, there's Gujarat, and some in Kashmir also. Is lignite coalfield. Peat is in the Nilgiri mountains of Tamil Nadu, which borders Tamil Nadu and Kerala. The darker gray regions which you see are actually bituminous, which is marked. It's not anthracite, it is just bituminous, which is marked. Jharkhand, Odisha, West Bengal, and Madhya Pradesh. So bituminous is according to the quality. Bituminous can fall in Gondwana also. Bituminous can fall in tertiary coalfields also. That is why it has been marked in both regions. So when distribution of coalfields is asked, you should remember that is it asked according to the age, Gondwana and tertiary, or is it asked according to the quality of coal. Moving to the last part of coal's advantages and disadvantages. Coal energy is highly affordable. So you buy one whole sack of coal or one whole bag of coal, it's not going to cost you much. So it's pretty cheap when compared to other fuel sources. But the disadvantage is that it has a large amount of carbon dioxide, burning, smoke, global warming, climate change. Environmentally, it is very bad. Coal is very easy to burn. Just like paper, you can just put it to burn very easily. There's no process involved behind it. But again, the negative is burning of these products releases sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, causes pollution, and environment it affects, causes acid rain also. High energy upon combustion. You don't have to do anything to improve the energy potential of coal. And coal is inexpensive. This is a very important point for it to be called an advantage. Coal is inexpensive. But on the disadvantage side, coal energy is a non-renewable source of energy. One day, every coal seam or coal reserve we have on the earth's surface will obviously get over, right? Yeah, so it's non-renewable. We cannot renew it. So that's a very big disadvantage. Coal is fast depleting, it is related to this non-renewable point, and because we consume much of it, we are taking so much of coal for factories, for energies, for thermal power plants, for daily use, for transportation. Coal is used at a very fast rate, at a very high amount. Coal is abundant, but it won't be abundant for the future. Because it is abundant, it is an advantage. The day it's going to get over, it will become a disadvantage. Coal energy is a reliable energy source. What does this point mean? For example, solar energy is not a reliable energy source because during winters you get very less amount of sunlight. Wind energy is not a reliable source because every day is not windy. Hydroelectric power is not a reliable source because the river doesn't flow throughout the year. See, these are the problems. Those are all non-conventional source of energy which has a lot of advantages, but those are the problems they face. But when you look at coal, if there is a huge coal seam for next 100 years, you don't have to worry every single day whether it is rainy season, winter season, summer season, autumn, spring, whether it is dry, you have water, you don't have water. It doesn't affect it at all. It is always going to give you energy irrespective of what the time of the year is. So that is why coal is considered as a reliable source of energy. And the last disadvantage, coal mining ruins the environment, puts lives in danger, especially of the coal miners. Many people die when they're doing underground coal mining and the environment gets affected. The next slide you'll just be getting an overview about how the environment gets totally destroyed because of a coal mine. So you can see that this is the landscape, this is the original profile of the area. You have a mountain. We cannot see this like this because this is the cross section, like how you do a biology cross section. This is when it's cut out. So by prospecting, by seismic analysis, we can understand, okay, under this mountain there are one, two, three, four beds of coal. Four coal seams are there. And to remove those four coal seams, you have to take out all the vegetation. Then we have to start cutting the mountain like slices of cake. But when you remove the vegetation, you can see that there's a stream nearby, there are mining community, people living nearby. Everything will get affected. The whole landscape is going to change. See how it's changing. The mountain vegetation is removed and the mining spoil or the waste. Trees are clear cut, explosives are used, massive machines are used to remove the earth, excess of coal seams from top to bottom. Now they can get each and every coal seam as separate layers. Take it out, next layer, take it out, next layer, remove it. So easily they can take all the layers outside. But what is happening? When you dump everything, it's almost like a landslide. The river will flood, the stream will flood. The people living nearby, they can't live nearby anymore. So it's all gonna cause a very big problem. And when you move into the third one, valleys, the last part where you can see it is totally different. When you compare it to the original profile and the last reclamation point, it is totally different. The valleys are smooth, terraced and replanted. There are totally no change, no resemblance to the original area. And the stream is lost, the mining community and the society living nearby also gets affected. Maybe we were able to take out the horizontal coal seams, but at the same time, we have lost the old landscape. To replace it like the original way, it will take a lot of human effort. Moving into the second half, petroleum, and within brackets I've written crude oil. So before we move on to this, there's a fundamental point that we need to understand. In our country, we call petroleum the name for the liquid we pour into bikes or trucks or even cars. But that's not actually petroleum. Petroleum is actually the term which is given to crude oil, which is that liquid you take it out from the soil. Like when you take out coal, you also take from other hydrocarbon deposits where animal matter has been dead and decayed animal matter, just like how plant matter was dead and it started to it didn't start to decay, but at the same time it was preserved and it formed coal. Same way, when animal matter starts to decay and it starts to release and it starts to form fossil fuels, that fossil fuel or crude oil, that first liquid you take out, that is actually petroleum. And when you filter it and when you boil it and distill it and take out different liquids at different temperatures, one will become kerosene, one will become diesel, and the one we use most commonly, which we tell petrol, is actually called gasoline. So every time you see the word petroleum, it actually means crude oil, the original black liquid or the original liquid from which all the other liquids are going to be taken out. That is petroleum. Don't confuse it with the petrol that we use right now. Okay, so petra means rock and oleum means oil. So you can also call it rock oil. You can also call it mineral oil, any way you want, because it is taken from rocks and minerals. Only in India, petroleum or petrol is used for referring to the liquid that we fill our automobiles. But actually, petroleum means crude oil, the original crude oil, you take it from the subsurface. And what we use for automobiles after refining process, what we use for the automobiles should actually be called gasoline. So liquid petrol is crude oil and the gas found above crude oil is actually called natural gas. Each liquid is separated out of crude oil by a process called fractional distillation, which is a very important process where it is boiled at different temperatures and cooled it and collected at different chambers. So when it's collected different chambers, after it is distilled and when the evaporated vapors get collected, you can get different liquids as well. Just like how coal was formed, you can look at this picture, how petroleum and natural gas is formed. So coal is formed in a completely different setting, while petroleum and natural gas is also formed in a completely different environment and setting. Coal is not formed along with petrol, but petrol and natural gas are most of the time formed together. Okay, you have to keep that in mind. Tiny sea plants and animals died and were buried on the ocean floor. Over time, they were covered by layers of sediment and rock. So the same thing is happening. Sea plants, an animal die and they fall and they're buried, and there is layers of sediment and rock over it. Over millions of years, the remains were buried deeper and deeper and deeper. The enormous heat and pressure turned them into oil and gas. So the same process, this is happening to animals and mostly sea creatures living marine organisms. Today, we drill down the layers of sedimentary rock to reach the rock formations that contain oil and gas. So what happens is that mostly in sedimentary rock there will be water, and when you pour liquids of few drops of oil on water, what happens? It will float or sink? It will obviously float. So in the third picture where it is written today, you can see trapped oil. So in that sedimentary rock, there is some portions where the pore spaces are black in color, which is oil. There are other portions where the pore spaces are white in color, which is actually filled with water. So since water is more dense, since water is more heavier, it is down. Oil is more lighter, it is on the top. And natural gas is much more lighter, it is more on the top. So it always forms a layer like that. Water at the bottom, on top of water you have petroleum or crude oil, and on top of crude oil you have natural gas. So this is how the layering setting according to the density and according to the weight. So you can see that 300 to 400 million years ago how the environmental setting was. 50 to 100 million years ago, because of deposition of more and more and more layers, and in between some of the sedimentary layers, one zone would be fully filled with dead animals and organisms, mostly marine organisms, and then they transform into, say, petroleum and natural gas. This is a very important picture. So it can be formed in different kind of environments, and the areas where petroleum is formed is actually called a trap, TRAP, because it is trapped inside. So if you remember in your previous years, you would have learned about the structural formations in the earth, and the common thing you would have learned are anticline and syncline. You would have also learned about folding and faulting. So this is an anticlinal trap where the rocks are bending in a convex shape. It is bending like a upside down U. And what happens is that the topmost layer is an impermeable rock, and you can see petroleum and natural gas are stuck in between. So A is impermeable shale, which means nothing can go through it. B is a porous reservoir rock. Through that, the petroleum just came up. C is the source rock from which it actually formed. It was the rock through which it actually formed. That rock only had the animals and organisms and all. And D is the oil well or the rig which is used to remove it. So there are many environmental settings where traps are formed. One is an anticlinal trap if it's formed in an anticline. Next is a fault trap. So imagine in the source rock, which is C, there was some oil, and then there was faulting that is taking place, and it pushes a layer up and all the petrol comes up. Then you have a salt dome or salt intrusion. So when there's an igneous intrusion, like we learned in last year, some intrusive igneous rock just coming, magma coming from inside the earth and just pushing it out. So if there's something from deep inside the earth that comes out and forms a structure like dome, it will push out all the petroleum and oil, and that also can form a trap. Then there's the last one, which is the stratigraphic trap. There's layers of rock which are forming, then there's a huge erosion or there's a destruction, natural disaster that is taking place, then another set of layers are forming. So in between the first set of layers, ABC, and then the next set of layers, which is the orange and the light blue and the one on the top, there will be a thin layer of petrol that is formed. So these are all different kinds of traps. You don't have to learn the different kind of trap, but you should know what is a trap. Trap is a geographical setting or an environment where different structural changes happen or different phenomena happen under the surface of the earth, which make sure that petroleum and natural gas is trapped in between two layers of rock, and that is helping people to remove it in an easier way. Okay, this is a very important picture of fractional distillation. Please take a look at it very carefully. Crude oil contains a variety of hydrocarbons. So you can look at the chemical formulas. Methane is CH4. So there's one carbon and four hydrogen. Butane is C4H10. which is 4 carbon and 10 hydrogen. Benzene is C6H6. So all these are hydrogen, carbon, hydrogen, carbon, carbon, hydrogen. But the number of carbon and the number of hydrogen is different. The same is the concept for all the outputs of crude oil. Petrol has different amount of carbon hydrogen, diesel has different amount of carbon hydrogen, aviation fuel has different amount of carbon hydrogen, kerosene has different amount of carbon hydrogen. How do we get the different amount of carbon and hydrogen? By boiling it. Simple. So crude oil contains a variety of hydrocarbons, which means hydrogen and carbon, that have different boiling points. So some liquids will boil at 100 degrees C, some will boil at 200, some will boil at 300. To separate these components, the oil is first sent to a boiler. So you see a steam boiler at the bottom. First there's a crude oil storage tank where there's the black liquid, then there's the steam boiler. The oil is first sent into the boiler where it is heated into a super hot mixture of liquid, and the vapor is called the feed. Okay, so it is the steam boiler will boil it at a very high temperature, and the vapor is sent into the next chamber. The tower contains, the mixture is then fed into the distillation tower. So you can see a huge vertical tower, that is the distillation tower. There's different pipes coming out. One, there's an orange pipe, there's a red pipe, there's a yellow pipe, there's a green pipe, there's a blue pipe. Oh my god, there are so many different kind of pipes coming out. What are these pipes taking out? They are taking out different components which are formed at different temperatures. Okay, in here the compounds with lower boiling point rise up as vapors, while the compounds with a higher boiling point fall downward as liquid. So what happens is that the compound which has a lower boiling point will easily get boiled. So something which boils at 50 degrees centigrade will boil first, but there's another liquid which boils at 500 degrees centigrade. What will happen? It will boil last. So whatever is going to be boiled easily will boil first, and that will be separated, and that is what is separated on the top. You can see light ends, boiling point less than 0 degrees centigrade. It automatically boils when it reaches the distillation tower and it is taken out. That is propane and butane, gasoline and all. Then what happens? There's something extra which is heated at a higher temperature, and that is the green ones: kerosene, jet fuel, diesel fuel. You separate the next set of fluids. Then what happens is, again there's some part of the liquid which is not yet boiled, that will come little more down, and that boils at maybe 300 or 400 degrees centigrade, which is the yellow and orange ones, which is taken as heavy fuel oil, waxes and lubricants. Then still there's something which is waste, which doesn't boil at that temperature also, and that comes to the bottommost point where you have the red pipe, which is bitumen or asphalt, which is mostly used to put the tar roads, the concrete, not concrete, but the highway roads which you see, which is made out of the black metal, the stones on which the black liquid is poured, which is called bitumen, or it's also called asphalt. So you can see in the left side the process where there's the boiling taking place. When the boiling is taking place, if there is, for example, butane molecules C4H10, the blue balls, bubbles which are coming out, for example, there are two set of layers. On the top layer there is some, when the boiling happens, there is some blue bubbles coming out. Imagine those blue bubbles are C4H10. That will be separated through a separate pipe. Then the waste comes down. So you can see the waste is flowing down, or the extra which doesn't get boiled, it will continue to flow down, and that will boil at a higher temperature. That might be C6H12. And then what doesn't boil there also will come little more down, and then it will boil at a little more higher temperature. So at every level there's a particular set of temperature. What boils there will be separated, what doesn't boil there will go down, then what boils there will be taken, what doesn't boil there will go down. So this is a very important picture. Please draw it and write down the explanation. The distilled products are then piped off at different levels of the tower. These are separated and are called fractions or distillates. It can be either called fractions, it can also be called distillates. This process may take place along multiple distillation towers. So as I told you, different temperatures will produce different fuels. So to put it in a normal logical sense, if you boil it at less than 40 degrees centigrade, you will get refinery gas. 40 to 200 degrees centigrade, you will get petrol. And what is petrol? gasoline, that is petrol, because petroleum is actually the major crude oil. Petrol is a word which can be used for gasoline also, but commonly petroleum is the common term for crude oil. Then 60 to 100 you get naphtha, 175 to 325 kerosene, 250 to 350 diesel, 300 to 375 lubricating oil, 370 to 600 you get fuel oil, greater than 600 you get bitumen. So bitumen is that thick liquid which doesn't even boil at 600 degrees C. So it's that resistant. So the small molecules, for example, petrol has small molecules. It has low boiling point, it is easily volatile, easier to ignite, it flows easily. But for example, fuel oil, something which has large molecules, high boiling point, not very volatile, hard to ignite, does not flow easily. So these are the differences between the lighter end and the heavier end. Moving into the distribution. So there will be two maps which I'll be showing, just like in the coal I showed you two maps. One was based on the origin of formation, there was Gondwana fields and tertiary coal fields, and then I showed another map based on the type, where you get anthracite, where you get bituminous, where you get lignite, where you get peat. So same way, distribution of coal fields or crude oil fields, not coal fields, crude oil fields, which means where you have a possibility to get crude oil. So the regions which are shaded with orange, only the orange zones, you have number 7, number 1, number 3, number 5, number 4, number 6, number 2. All these are orange zones. If you look at the bottom, you can see orange zones are category 1, which are proven commercial productivity. While the pink zones, number 8, number 9, are identified productivity, which means that in the coming future, and even in 10 Andaman Nicobar Islands, in the coming future, they can use it for taking out oil. Number 3 category, which is yellow prospective basins, which is the regions where they're still prospecting, they're still investigating to find out whether it has petroleum or not. And number 4 is potentially prospective. They haven't even started to check, they might check in the future. So the only places where we are consistently taking out petrol is the orange zones. So look at the states where it falls. It has some parts of Tamil Nadu, it has some parts of Andhra Pradesh, it has Mizoram, Tripura, Assam, Meghalaya, and Rajasthan. So only the orange zones are classified under the category that yields a good amount of crude oil that can be used for commercial purposes. The distribution of oil refineries, major oil refineries in India. When you look at this picture, you can easily remind yourself that most of the points which have oil refineries fall in the orange zone. We just looked at the orange zone, and all the orange zones were the Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh region, the northeastern region, and there were some parts of Gujarat also. Most of the oil refineries are falling in the orange zone. And you have two major types of oil refineries. One is onshore, which means on the land. The whole oil rig and the pipe and taking out oil and gas, everything happens on land. Example, Digboy oil field in Assam, Ankleshwar oil field in Gujarat, and that's the Barnar district in Rajasthan. So these are three major onshore oil fields. Please do remember the names, especially the name Digboy oil field. It is one of the most famous oil fields in whole of India. You would have heard about the company Oil and Natural Gas Company, ONGC. Anybody who works in ONGC, if you know, you can go and ask that person. Digboy oil field is considered as one of the most famous, if not the most famous onshore oil field. Just like how the most famous offshore oil field in India is Mumbai High, the most famous onshore oil field in India is Digboy, Assam. Moving into offshore, so these are the oil fields which are dug and drilled out from the ocean, outside land. So Mumbai High in Maharashtra, most of you know that. Alibet Island in Gulf of Kambad. So there's two gulfs in Gujarat. The one on top is Gulf of Kutch. The one at the bottom near to Maharashtra is Gulf of Kambad. Then you have Kaveri and Krishna basins, which is in Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, which forms the third offshore basin. There are other offshore and onshore basins, but these are the three major offshore and onshore basins where there is oil refining taking place. The last part, advantages and disadvantages. Advantages, high energy density, which means small amount of oil can produce a large amount of energy. The simple technique, you have a bike which will give you 80 kilometers per liter, 60 kilometers per liter, which means the machine of the bike can produce, or is able to run, the whole machine of a bike is able to run for 60 kilometers with just 1 liter of that liquid. Are you able to understand that? You're just giving 1 liter of the liquid. If you drink 1 liter of water, are you able to run 60 kilometers? No. But 1 liter of petrol is able to make sure that a bike is able to go, the machine is able to run for 60 kilometers. That is so much energy. So much energy. So that is one of pretty easier examples for you to understand that small amount of that oil can produce large amount of energy. Easy availability, infrastructure, transport and use. Now there's easily available, there's easily transported through pipelines. It can be easily transported from, for example, Digboy oil field, it has been piped. It can be transported to Mumbai directly through a overhead or underground pipe. It can be transported because it's liquid. Crucial for a wide variety of industries. Many industries need petroleum or crude oil for their use. Easy to produce, easy to refine. The refining process, you just have to boil it, and what gets separated will get separated. What doesn't get separated will go down more temperature, then it will get separated. So it's easy to produce, easy to refine, easy to take different liquids. Constant power source and reliability, the same point of coal. As long as you have petrol, winter, summer, day with rain, day without rain, mountain region, plain region, agricultural land, desert, no problem. Every place you will get petrol. So it is not affected by weather, it is not affected by climate, it is not affected by topography, it is not affected by any of this. As long as you have it, you will constantly be able to produce energy. Disadvantages, greenhouse gas emissions, pollution of water and earth, growth of terrorism and violence. Very, very important point. Please don't misunderstand this as a small point. It's a very important point. Most of the regions where terrorism is there, if you look in the Middle East, they give rise to violence and growth of terrorism as oil money is used to fund these organizations. You take the major terrorist regions of ISIS, Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, Al Qaeda, or you also take the other important terrorist organization like Boko Haram in Nigeria. There are many, many terrorist organizations, mostly in the Middle East of Saudi Arabia or even Afghanistan. They all depend on this oil money to feed them, to make sure they are able to get their arms, to make sure they are able to get their weapons. Or how will they able to get so much money to produce all these weapons and arms? So it is one of the most important root causes for the growth of terrorism and violence in the whole world. Emission of harmful substances, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, acid rain, you know that. Leads to production of very harmful toxic materials during refining. Plastic is one of the most harmful substances. So when we learned about industries, mineral based industry, we learned about 4 types of iron and steel industry, then we learned about electronic industry, and the last one we learned is petrochemical industry. So petrochemical industry is actually formed from hydrocarbons only. So you take this crude oil, you take this natural gas, you refine it, you produce all these liquids, and at one temperature you get this bitumen. And from this bitumen, you will be able to produce the most commonly used product, which is plastic. And you know how harmful is plastic. You take any variation of plastic, polythene, polypropylene, or any chemical different variable of plastic, it will all have carbon, hydrogen, carbon, hydrogen, carbon, hydrogen. It will also be a hydrocarbon. So plastic is one of the most harmful substances that has been produced. So other than pollution, don't keep on just saying pollution, pollution, pollution is the problem of petrol. Pollution is there, greenhouse effect is there, yes, but plastic production comes from hydrocarbons or petrol. Terrorism and growth of violence comes from petrol. So these are other points which you can add. Impact on environment is drought, because you clear a land and then you drill it out. You can't go on top of a forest and start drilling, you have to clear a land. So it loses the soil's fertility. When you ship oil from one place to another, if oil gets leaked, it can cause oil spill, which will affect animal life, mostly marine life. Huge amount of deforestation is needed for you to start oil drilling if it's onshore. That's huge amount of deforestation, which is another environmental impact. And then when oil is drilled or when oil is spilled, It can, or when oil is used for boats, yachts, or when oil is used for huge submarines, it releases gases, and that gases mixes with the water and causes water pollution. So don't mix oil spill and water pollution, both are totally different. Oil spill is when oil leak happens when it is transported. Water pollution is the burning of those oil which leads to gases, and the gases mix with the water and that water becomes polluted. And vehicular pollution or air pollution is also another impact. There are many other impacts also, but these are the five major impacts of drought or loss of soil fertility, deforestation, oil spills, water pollution, air pollution are the impacts. So I hope you are able to understand and get a whole understanding of the chapter conventional source of energy. Keep in mind of distribution and how it is produced, the origin and production, advantages, disadvantages, impact of the environment. There are two or three extra things which are I've added on, but these are very important for you to get the full understanding of the chapter. See you with the next chapter.